The session is recorded. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to have everyone here. This is our program, Global Impact Series. It's one of the many programs that we do here at World Affairs Council Tacoma. We have travel, we have book club, and many other. I would share the link in the chat box, and you would be able to go and see. You're all welcome to participate. Also, our mission here is to promote public understanding of world affairs and help our members engage in the global community and feel comfortable with global affairs and global topics and become a truly global citizen. Today's session is obviously, you can see on the screen, it's on international students and how they contribute to the US economy, diversity, and culture. And we have wonderful colleagues who are joining us today, Julie and Mary from IIE. Hi, Julie. Hi, Mary. And before I invite both of them to come and talk, I just wanted to give a quick heads up to two of the events which are coming up. One is our book club meeting happening on March 25th. The theme for the 2021 book club is Traveler's World. And the book we are reading in March is The Art of Travel. So please join us. I'll share the link in the chat. And also in April, we are having a discussion on US-China. And Michael Fowler, who is here, who's also on the board of the World Affairs Council, he's going to be moderating that discussion. So with that, I want to quickly give you a context of what we are discussing here. We have almost 1 million international students in the US, which is a small percentage of the total number of students in the US. I think it's less than 7% of the total population. But this small population of students make such an important impact in our economy, in our culture and diversity. So broadly, the takeaway of today's session is to understand the economic impact that these students make. Also, you will notice that a lot of these international students are involved in accelerating innovation in the US. Some of the most iconic companies, when you read about them, you'll find that founders and co-founders or both are international students. And in most cases, they were classmates or they met at a college conference. And most importantly, I think, is the public diplomacy part, people-to-people contact. It's very unique for US to have these international students. And I was reading at one of the case studies of Airbnb, the founder was talking about how if you analyze, it is very rare for strangers to come together and in a very short span of time have lunch together or get invited to a family event. It takes a long time. It takes years, and sometimes it takes several years. But Airbnb founder was telling the story that one of the things we realized, and that is what helped them disrupt the whole hotel, that we bring strangers together, and in a very short span of time, in a matter of few hours, 1 hour, 3 hours, 4 hours, these people come very close. They get invited to each other's family events. They become great friends. They start companies together. And I think that analogy is so appropriate. US as well. When international students come to US, they are not just, they're not strangers anymore. They become our co-fellows, they become our co-residents. They go and shop, they become roommates. They rent a car together. They drive each other to the airport or pick it up. They share books, they share rooms. And, that phenomenon of Airbnb, in a very short span of time, strangers coming together and doing some of the most important things of our life. It is very unique to the US. There aren't very many countries where this is happening at such a scale. You'll get a much better sense of the scale when you hear from our panelists today. So with that, I would like to invite Mary and Julie to take the floor. They both represent Institute of International Education, which is one of the most reputed nonprofits in the world, which advocates, measures, and also shares a lot of knowledge about international education. So the floor is yours, Mary and Mary.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Syed. And thanks to all of you at the World Affairs Council of Tacoma for having us today. As Syed said, my name is Mary Karam McKey, and I currently lead IIE's portfolio of mission-aligned, corporate and foundation-funded programming. I'm based actually in San Francisco, so I'm in the same time zone as all of you. And I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague, Julie Baer, who leads our research on international student mobility. She's based on the East Coast, so it's a little bit later for her. So thanks for being with us, Julie. We'd like to start by just providing a brief introduction to IIE, and then Julie will share some of our research findings on international student mobility with an eye to international students in the US, as Syed said. And then I'll share just a few examples of the programs, that we lead at IIE and are really honored to lead. And then we can kind of open it up to discussion. I love that so many folks do have their cameras on, and so I'm just going to ask, how many of you have studied abroad, have been an international student, have had an international experience that's been life-changing? And you can either raise your hand or you can use your reaction button. So it looks like quite a number of you. Which is really wonderful. It's hard on Zoom to read a room as well as you can in person, but these reaction buttons are really great. So I think that both Julie and I are really really privileged to also be talking to a group of people who understand the deep appreciation for all that an international experience brings. And as Syed kind of mentioned, it's those small things that we do on a daily basis that when we do and share those things with people who have a different perspective, a different way of doing them from ourselves, that really brings greater understanding, which really builds relationships that last a lifetime. And so I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit about IIE. So next slide, please, Julie. So, a little bit about our mission is really to leverage international education to make the world a better place in a nutshell. It's very simple. And next slide, Julie, we do that in many different ways. We do that by advancing scholarship. And so we lead many of the world's most impactful scholarship and fellowship programs. Many of you might know the Fulbright program, which we partner and administer on behalf of and in partnership with the US Department of State. Many of our programs help build economies, so they're designed to address specific needs that have direct ties to building the economy or building certain fields in particular countries. And since our inception, we've been really focused on promoting access to opportunity. So we have an eye to reaching populations who've been systemically excluded, and this looks different in different parts of the world, as you all know, and at different points of history, depending on what's happening in the world. We've helped to really support opportunities for different populations. So the next slide gives you just a sense of the breadth of our work, kind of by the numbers. So I'll just call out a few things. We work with about 29,000 participants annually. And when you think about that number and those individuals and that multiplier effect, we really feel like the work that we do has a really important impact. We work in over 180 countries and in about 200 different types of programs annually. And we have a really extensive network of higher ed partners globally. And so with that network, we're really able to support students around the world and ensure that they are placed in programs that really speak to what they hope to do in the future. So the next slide, Julie. This just gives you a sense of where we are in the world as an organization. We have about 17 different offices and then other sort of project offices around the world. So we're really able to kind of leverage our team and our global network to bring both, that global perspective and then the real local context that makes or breaks our ability to, I think, build programs that are really impactful and relevant to participants. And so the next slide, Julie. This will just give you a sense of the different types of partners that we work with, both, public sector, obviously the US. Saeed talked a lot about public diplomacy, and we work very closely with the US Department of State and USAID and a number of different types of public diplomacy programs and development programs. We've also worked extensively with governments around the world, and then the corporate foundation and university sector as well. Next slide, Julie. So, this is again a little bit about our mission, and I just wanted to point out that 2 years ago, I almost said 1 year, and then I said to myself, no, it's 2021, it's 2 years now. So we were founded in 1919, and we celebrated our centennial now 2 years ago, and really kind of reaffirmed our mission, and have been really thinking critically about, what is important in the next 100 years, and what impact do we want to be making moving forward. The next slide is just a little bit more specifics about what we do and the different types of things, kind of how we do it. And I'm not gonna read through it, because what I really want to do is highlight our research on international student mobility, and introduced Julie, who's going to do a deep dive kind of into the numbers. And as we look at the numbers, when we were talking with Saeed about this yesterday, I think we all recognize that the numbers tell a story. The numbers, however, are not, they tell a story, they don't tell the individual stories, right? And I think that it would be wonderful to host a group of international students so that they could tell you their stories on a personal level. And I think that we hope to do that. So as Julie is sharing some of the data and the numbers with us, I think we'll all keep in mind that these are people who have had real experiences. Valentine's Day just happened, and I remember we tweeted something out about 2 Fulbrighters that met on their Fulbright program and got married. And people do have, these are such life-changing experiences. And I think as Julie takes us through the numbers, let's all just keep that in mind as well. So over to you, Julie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you all virtually tonight. And as Mary said, my name is Julie Baer, and I'm a research specialist here at IIE. And so, I think this is a great start that she just, highlighted, that these are very macro level trends that I'm going to go over, but hopefully it'll help you, help just give some context to the numbers of international students, both globally as well as here in the United States, and even in Washington State. I do have some statistics to share about that as well. So I do want to start off with the big picture and really take a moment to look at that global landscape. And so students pursuing higher education outside their home country has grown significantly over the past 20 years, more than doubling from 1998, when there were just over 2 million globally mobile higher ed students, to the 5.6 million reported in 2018, according to UNESCO. Now, there are a number of factors for this, and I'm happy to delve into those further, and they include both push and pull factors, such as limited home country higher education capacity, growing middle classes, government scholarship programs, just to name a couple. But of this 5.6 million who choose to study outside their home country, where are these students going? Well, as the number of students has increased over time, so has global competition for higher education talent among the leading host countries. Now, in 2000, as well as today, the #1 host of international students does remain the United States, and we host about 20% of all the globally mobile students in the world. Now, I want to pull up the next kind of realm of data just to see what that looks like in the top 10 hosts, though. So the UK is the second leading host, and I will note that the US hosts nearly twice as many students as the United Kingdom. Now, when we look at the other leading hosts, though, you've got the US, the UK, those have been very stable over the past decade. But we have certainly seen changes in these top leading hosts of international students. For example, Canada is new to that #3 position. And that really showcases the evidence of successful efforts to expand outreach and recruitment of international students globally. Now, these top hosts are not only hosting a larger number of students, but also a greater percentage of the total number of international students. So today, the top 5 countries host more than half of that 5.6 million international students worldwide. So that is the global context, but I now want to turn to look specifically about who is coming to the United States. So the data that I'm going to go over is collected through a data collection initiative called Open Doors. And Open Doors is produced by the Institute of International Education with the support of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Now, each year we collect data on 4 key areas, and they are the international students coming to the U.S., U.S. study abroad, international scholars who are here to teach or conduct research, and then students who are specifically coming to study intensive English. Now, the data from this survey has been analyzed and compiled into our annual print publication, which I have an image of on the right, which just went out to the field. And of course, we have a very robust website, opendoorsdata.org, which has a lot of the data that I'll go over today. So if you ever want to access any of it, that's the place to do so. And I will say today, I'm going to focus principally on the data from the International Student Census, but if you have questions about the others, I'm always happy to go into that as well. So for our International Student Census, I do want to take a moment to go over the information that is collected in the survey and what the data is really reflective of. And so to collect this data, we survey over 2,900 US higher education institutions, and we really benefit from the consistent, robust responses that we receive over time each year. And we've actually been conducting this data collection effort on Open Doors since 1948-49. So we have 70 years of data on international students coming to the US. And I will also note that specifically for Washington State, we survey over 60 higher ed institutions. Now, in this census, we're collecting data on non-immigrant international students in the United States on a temporary visa. And then the key area that I wanted to highlight tonight was the time frame. And the data that I'm going to go over is from the fall of 2019 to reflect that 2019-20 academic year. So we, of course, are noting that this year's data does not yet reflect the effects of COVID-19 on international students at US higher institutions. But what I think is really important is that it really provides us with that baseline of where the US was prior to COVID-19, and it'll create a great comparison for the trends that we will see in the next year of data. So, and now to that data. So I think, as I mentioned, in 2019-20, we've seen over 1 million international students in the United States. And this is actually the 5th year in a row that we've had over 1 million international students. That being said, we did see a decrease of about 1.8% over the prior year. And I guess I just wanted to also take that moment to reflect on this number because, it's really easy to say 1 million and just kind of move on. But that is really 1 million international students coming to communities and classrooms across the United States. As I mentioned, they make up about 5% of the US higher ed population within the United States. So they're really bringing all sorts of amazing insights and perspectives to colleges and communities and classrooms throughout the United States. Now, and one of the great benefits of Open Doors is really getting to see this data over time and how it's shifted. So here I've put together just a 20-year trend line where you can see that robust growth of international students coming to the United States over the past 20 years. And really over the past 10 years, the number of students choosing to pursue higher ed in the United States has nearly doubled. Now, that being said, we have seen a slowing of this growth over the past 5 years. But again, as we talked about, the US remains the #1 host of international students worldwide. So this is a great top line number, but I always find it really interesting to start to go below that top line number and really look at the data. And so the first cut of this I wanted to take a look at is kind of what academic levels these students are studying at. And we do see that the vast majority of students are studying at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And if I include all of the enrolled students, which are undergraduate, graduate, and non-degree students, and non-degree students can be certificate students or exchange students, we did see that enrolled students declined by about 2% this year. And there are many factors that really explain this decline, and that includes that increasing global competition I was talking about, expanding educational capacity in home countries, shifting demographics, as well as government scholarship program changes. Now, I do also want to focus a moment on the bottom category of the slide, which shows the growth in students pursuing optional practical training, or OPT. Now, OPT is an option that's provided to international students to work in the United States and gain practical experience in their field of study. So what this means is that international students who have graduated with a degree can work for up to 12 months in the United States, regardless of what their degree is, and that those who pursued a degree within the STEM fields can work for up to 36 months. And so this provides valuable hands-on experience for international students, as well as an opportunity for local employers to attract really talented individuals to join their workforce for a temporary period. And I will say the reason we're able to collect this data is that colleges and universities that hosted these students continue to hold their visas while they're on OPT. So we have some really great and rich data about these students who are pursuing optional practical training. And so at the top line level, we have seen that as of 2019-20, there were over 220,000 international students in the US that were pursuing optional practical training. And we had seen really rapid growth for the past couple of years. Although that has eased this year, we only saw a slight increase. But despite this leveling, the total number of OPT students are much, much higher levels than what we've seen in the past. And it really continues to be that welcome opportunity for students to gain practical work experience in their field of study after they've graduated. So this is kind of that top line look of international students in the United States. And I wanted to take a quick look and compare it to specifically what we're seeing in Washington State. So we found that there were over 26,000 international students that studied in Washington in 2019-20. And I will note that the majority of these students, over 21,000 of them, studied in the Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue, Washington metropolitan area. And we did find that that greater Seattle metropolitan area was the 9th leading metro area for international students in 2019-20. Now, when we look at the percent change here, we did see a larger percentage decline in international students in Washington State, about 5% in comparison to the national level. Now, this is partially due, I think, to the composition of schools hosting large numbers of international students in Washington State. So let's take a look at a couple of those top institutions. Now, the University of Washington is by far the largest host with over 9,000 international students, and they're actually ranked 13th in the nation for hosting the most international students. But what I find really interesting about this chart, and it's a really unique profile to Washington State, is that half of the top 10 institutions are community colleges, which is a huge testament to the community college system in Washington State. And I was actually just doing a presentation on community colleges, and I wanted to pull in this slide, which shows the proportion of international students at community colleges versus all other institution types in the state. And you can see the very robust trend here with Washington State having over a third of your international students attending community colleges. So in comparison at the national level, which I had to even kind of drop below these top ones, we see that only about 7% of students attend community colleges. Now, I will say what we have noted about community colleges in the past year is that international student enrollment fell by a higher proportion, about 8%. And so it's this drop in international students at community colleges, as well as maybe some of the other institutional types, that may have driven the 5% decline that we noted in Washington State overall. So I now want to turn to look at where international students are coming from around the world. And the top 3 places of origin continue to be China and India, as well as South Korea. And China and India, of course, have the largest populations in the world, but I'll just note that they do make up about 53% of the total international student population in the United States. Now, as we include the top 25 places of origin and beyond, we do see that international student inflows are coming from all regions, including Latin America, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. But I really like zooming out and looking at the global picture, because you can see that international students are coming from around the world to pursue a US higher ed education. And this year, international students came from over 200 different places of origin. Now, what we have noted, though, is that over the years that, again, states can really have a very unique profile in terms of the students they attract. So in Washington, we do see that China is the #1 place of origin overall, with approximately 38% of students from China, which is slightly higher than the national level. But what I find really interesting is to see Vietnam as the #2 place of origin, with about 8% of students coming from Vietnam, in comparison to the 2% that we see at the national level. And we do see several other notable variations in the top 10 places of origin, to include Indonesia and Hong Kong, within here. And overall, what I really took away is you kind of see those very strong ties with Asia reflected in the leading places of origin in Washington. Whereas in the national picture, we do see some other places such as Brazil and Mexico in the Latin American and Caribbean region that are not in the top 10 for Washington. So another really interesting element to look at are the fields of study. And what we find is that over half of international students, about 52%, study in the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, and particularly in the fields of engineering and math and computer science. So I wanted to take a look at some of these leading fields of study. So starting off with engineering, we do see that one in every 5 international students majored in engineering. However, the overall number of engineering students fell in 2019-20. Now, the number of international students studying in math and computer science was relatively flat. And there's just been a huge growth over the past decade in the number of students studying math and computer science. And it was 2 years ago that it surpassed business and management to become that #2 field of study. We have continued to see a decline of approximately about 4% of international students studying in business and management, although this is an improvement over the decline that we saw last year. And then the fourth most popular field of study is social sciences, and this has been relatively flat over the past couple of years. Now, one of the areas that I did want to highlight is just how this can vary by academic level. I don't have a slide on it here, but it can also vary by where these students are coming from. But just to show that it's not universal what these students are studying. So when we look at this by the fields by the undergraduate level, STEM majors make up about 39% of the total. And when we look at specific fields of study, we actually find that business and management is the top major at this academic level. Now, at the graduate level, though, we see a different picture. So here, STEM majors make up more than half of all international students. And then this grows even further when we're looking at OPT. So if we see that 68% of OPT students are STEM majors. And I think that's, again, really evidence of the international students' strong interest in taking advantage of the STEM OPT extension, which does allow them to stay in the United States for 3 years. But I think it also highlights a couple of other interesting points. And the first of which is that U.S. higher education institutions often offer excellent opportunities to pursue research in, the leading science and technology fields, and that, talented international students may be very much attracted to the STEM fields within U.S. higher ed, particularly at the graduate level. And the second is that, many students do avail themselves of this opportunity to gain practical experience, and that U.S. industries really have the opportunity to take advantage of this global pipeline of talent that, that has been educated here in the United States. Now, another area that I wanted to look at, Mary's talked about this, Syed's talked about this, international students are significant contributors to our classrooms and communities throughout the US, but I do also want to note that they contribute to the US economy. So according to the US Department of Commerce, international students contributed about $44 billion, primarily through education funding, excuse me, which has grown nearly fivefold over the past 20 years. So actually, when you look at the economic output as an export, this economic contribution is classified as the United States' 5th largest service export. And to put it into context, I've heard, we export more in education than we do in soybeans. So it's just another way of looking at this. And another important economic metric is just how many jobs are supported by international students. And there's an organization called NAFSA, and they put out a report using some of our data from Open Doors, and they found that there are almost 416,000 direct or indirect jobs that were either created or supported by international students in 2019-20. Now, when we look at this data, again, specifically for Washington, we find that international students created or supported more than 8,000 jobs and contributed approximately $924 million to the local economy. So, and I will say, if you're interested in looking at this information by either your congressional district or you want to see the specific economic impact at a specific U.S. higher ed institution, that's all available on NAFSA's economic value tool. Now, one of the reasons that international students contribute so much to the U.S. economy is that most students in the U.S. support their studies with funding from international sources, particularly personal funds to fund their education. And I will note that this number is particularly high for undergraduate students in comparison to graduate students who may be more likely to get a teaching or research assistantship. Now, outside, of the Open Doors world, another way of looking at their contributions is what they go on to do after they leave school. And while we don't track this data in Open Doors, I did want to highlight a 2018 study by the National Foundation for American Policy that noted that nearly a quarter of the billion-dollar startups had a founder who first came to the United States as an international student. And several names that I think we're all familiar with there. Now, outside of international students, I had mentioned earlier that Open Doors also collects data on international scholars who are coming to the United States. And this can be either to teach or conduct research or even clinical work. And I wanted to highlight this population as well because these international scholars can also be drivers of innovation as well as collaborative research. And we found in 2019-20 that there were over 123,000 international scholars pursuing academic activities at U.S. higher ed institutions. Now, for this data, we were collecting information from summer 2019 to summer 2020. So we did note a decline in international scholars this year due to COVID-19. And just to keep going back to Washington State, we did find that there were just over 1,900 international scholars pursuing scholarly research within Washington State. Now, these scholars are primarily engaged in the scientific output of U.S. higher ed institutions, principally through research, which you can see about 80% of them were involved in research on campus. And here I have the top fields of specialization highlighted. And what we found is that over 3/4 of these scholars really do specialize within the STEM fields, principally in the physical and life sciences, engineering, and health professions. Now, as I noted at the beginning, much of our data in Open Doors is prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but IIE has produced a series of reports over the past year that have taken that preliminary look of how the field has been affected. So I wanted to pull just a couple of quick data points from our fall 2020 International Student Enrollment Snapshot Survey. And what we found from this quick snapshot, it's not as comprehensive as Open Doors, but it gives us this timely insight. Is that we found that 99% of responding institutions offered online instruction only, or either only online instruction or through a hybrid model. And this finding was critical and really confirmed our need to collect data on international students who are both on U.S. campuses and those studying online. And that could be either from the United States or from abroad. And this allowed us to estimate that level of engagement of students who are pursuing U.S. Higher education, and allowed us to capture students who may not have been able to make it to the U.S. this fall, but are really still committed to a U.S. higher education. So according to our fall 2020 enrollment snapshot, international students at U.S. higher ed institutions in the United States as well as those online outside the United States, decreased by about 16% in fall 2020. Now, responding institutions did indicate that new international students took advantage of opportunities to begin their studies remotely, though, when they couldn't travel to the United States. Now, in addition to this enrollment, though, I do want to highlight that 90% of the institutions we surveyed reported international student deferrals in fall 2020. And they said that, just of the subset of about 500 institutions we surveyed, that they had nearly 40,000 international students that had deferred enrollment to a future semester. And we anticipate that despite this decline, the US will remain the #1 destination globally for students to earn their degrees as of fall 2020. So, these are a couple of quick snapshots, but I do want to kind of end with the fact that despite the challenges caused by the pandemic, we do see in our fall 2020 snapshot survey that institutions are continuing to conduct outreach and recruitment of international students. And rather than stepping away from internationalization due to the immense challenges of this year, our findings very much indicated that US higher ed institutions are remaining committed to recruiting international students and really ensuring that these students have a positive experience here in the United States. Now, I know I've gone through a lot of data and statistics, and I'm happy to link to some of the resources I mentioned in the chat so that way you can take a look at them afterwards. And I really hope this context gives you a high-level picture of what we're seeing at that national level, and I hope it can be supplemented by some of the student voices and the experiences and how transformative this international education can be. But a big part of global international exchange is due to international scholarship programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary to speak more about some of the types of programs that IIE has worked on and the transformative power of some of these programs.
Thanks so much, Julie. Yeah, as Julie said, and I always enjoy hearing about open doors as much as it's part of my world. I think that there's so much to dig into, so we definitely look forward to opening this up to more discussion in just a little bit. So, we do know that scholarships are a really important source of funding, both for international students and for students in the US as the cost of higher education continues to increase. And so one of the things we've done is we've looked at just sort of the fields that were formally being funded through scholarships and then kind of what's emerging. And I think it definitely trends with what Julie mentioned about computer science being like one of the top fields. So AI, computer science, data science. So this just gives you kind of a sense of how the types of opportunities for funding are changing for students. And the next slide, Julie. And when we celebrated our centennial a couple of years ago, we did sort of an impact survey, a tenure impact survey of students who participated in IIE administered scholarship programs. And these are just some of the impacts. A lot of students, alumni are actually working in industries that were related to their program focus, and that their experiences as international students and scholarship recipients really had huge impacts on the kinds of careers they chose. They've been able to kind of leverage their experience to gain new skills. And, they report positive impacts on their communities and their organizations. So I think all of the things that we anecdotally hear, were certainly confirmed in this research that we conducted. So now I kind of wanted to move into sharing a little bit about, and you can go to the next slide, Julie, a little bit about a few different examples of scholarship programs that we've led at IIE with an eye to students coming to the US and really contributing to the US while they're here and learning, and a lot of the exchange that happens as a result of those programs. Many of you are familiar with Fulbright, so I chose not to talk about Fulbright. One of the examples that I wanted to share was that of the Brazil Scientific Mobility Program, which was a really unique initiative of the Brazilian government to internationalize higher ed and equip Brazilians with an international experience and experience in STEM fields. And so their goal was to send 100,000 students across the world to have this international experience in STEM. And IIE had the privilege of working with almost 30,000 of those. And so we worked to place them at US universities. They ended up, we supported sort of internship opportunities, and many of them did internships with US companies here, and then also went to work for those companies when they went back to Brazil. And so it was a really fantastic initiative. The other thing that I was thinking about as I was listening to Julie and kind of preparing for this is I would not be surprised if, when looking at open door trends, that after this initiative, we saw increases in US students wanting to study in Brazil. Again, because of that one-to-one, you know, there were so many more Brazilian students in the US at that point. And I think that I'm actually curious to go back and look to see if there was an increase after BSMP ended. The second program that I just wanted to share briefly with you is well, actually, this is more of a series of programs. So you go to the next slide, Julie. This is kind of our work with Exxon Mobil, and it's spanned more than a decade, and we've worked with them to support opportunities for young people in the countries where they do business and in fields that are critical to their business. So over the years, we've placed students at universities across the US, mostly in STEM fields, where they've received full scholarships. Often, you know, they're not fluent in English, and so we've done a lot of preparation. They've done some English language training before they enter their programs. In other cases, some of them are coming as PhD students, and so you know, Exxon Mobil generously funds, if they have families, their families to come with them. And I just wanted to highlight that piece of it too, because then it not only becomes, you know, the individual experience, but how a family experiences living in a different culture and how the communities that they live in, these students live in, also have the opportunity to learn and engage with folks from different parts of the world. And then finally, the last example I wanted to share speaks more to the last part of Julie's, what Julie presented around sort of the impact of scholars. And so this program is funded by Carnegie Corporation of New York, and it focuses on African-born academics in the US and institutions in Africa, higher ed institutions in Africa, kind of coming together and collaborating on different projects. A lot of times folks are doing co-curriculum development, they're doing mentoring of graduate students, they're working on collaborative research projects. And so in this case, the African-born academics from the US and Canada go to host institutions. So it's less about coming to the US, although a lot of those collaborations kind of result in continued exchange back and forth. I think that the research that the US academics are doing are enhanced because of the opportunity that they've had. And so with that, you know, we'd love to kind of open it up to discussion or questions, and talk a little bit more with you all.
Thank you, Mary. That was a lot of information, a lot of data. I have added the link in the chat And folks, you can go and see a lot of more data and a lot of extended explanation to some of the things that both of our panelists have spoken about. We're open to questions now. There are some questions in the chat. Let's take them one by one. One question that I got from my educators community is, you mentioned jobs that, international students, when they come, they contribute economically and they create jobs. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of jobs are these?
In terms of the jobs that they're creating? So I think it really, I mean, there's many, there are the people who work directly with international students at US higher ed institutions, but what's also being factored in here is all of the other ways that international students contribute economically. So their living expenses, they may be buying or renting homes here, they're eating food here, they're shopping at our grocery stores. So, they're really interacting in our communities and through that supporting jobs in the local communities.
Great. And also there are two questions which are sort of related to policy here. And I had another question also about the policy. With all that you have said today, it seems like a no-brainer that it's a great idea to have international students come to US. Why then there is this perception among certain people that when international students come, they harm local American jobs or they harm local American economy when there's no evidence of that? Why is that perception there?
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Julie, if you had something.
I think, there's perception can sometimes be hard to change. I think it's something that we certainly all work towards, putting out data and information that can kind of challenge some of these perceptions, such as putting out the fact that international students are contributing to the local economies. Sometimes when I've looked at enrollments in US higher education, we've actually seen a decline in US higher education. So international students are actually coming and filling, up some of those seats where we have seen declines and keeping those jobs and programs alive. So, I think that while these perceptions may exist, there's a lot of evidence that we can put out there and try to engage with the field to show some of this information.
Right, let's switch to some of the questions in the chat here. And folks who have posted this question, if you wish to come out on video and ask your question directly, you're welcome to. But let me quickly pick this very first question here. Is there an ideal age to travel overseas, or is there a sort of a minimum age do you see a trend that, at certain age when Americans are going abroad to study, or folks who are coming to US to study? Do you see some age brackets which are more prominent?
Well, I mean, I guess I can start, and then maybe Julie, you might have some perspectives from the data that you're seeing. But I think before we kind of got started, I was mentioning to a few folks that I used to work in high school youth exchange, and so would work with high school students here in the US who were, wanting to go overseas, or I was more involved with international high school students coming to the US. And I think that there are many different types of programs out there that have, age requirements. I think that, students can go as, in their early teenage years. There are some really great programs for, doing short 2-week summer programs and things like that. I think it really, it kind of comes down to the child and sort of, whether you think they'll, whether you think they're ready to kind of to engage in that kind of experience, whether it's more of like a sort of group study visit, sort of a short-term 2-week opportunity, or are they ready to kind of do an exchange a la, for example, Rotary, where they would go and live with a family for a year and attend a high school and perhaps not know the language. So I think it really depends. It's not an exact answer, but I don't know, Julie, if you're seeing anything trend-wise.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we see all ages who are studying. I will note that not in Open Doors, because Open Doors really is focused at the college and university level. But we did recently put out a report on international students who are studying at US high schools, and we found that there were about 70,000 of them who were coming here to pursue some sort of US high school education. But then in comparison, we have that 1 million international students who are here for higher education. And then you've got your scholars who are probably, just going by a typical age range of a high school student versus a university student, versus scholars who could be young or, quite senior in terms of their experience and time in the field. So, I don't think that there necessarily is a right time, but we certainly do see exchange happening at all different levels.
Great. The other question here is Amelia is asking, and I think she's touching upon some of these topics which is really hotly debated. With increased competition for international education across the board, more and more countries are recognizing how important, and the fears around gun policy in the US, also the nationalist sentiment. What strategies are IIE and other institutions creating and implementing to attract and increase international students?
Well, I mean, I think we're definitely, partnering with higher ed institutions through our IIE network, through the Alliance for International Education, which is an advocacy organization. I mean, I think that, what we're kind of hearing is that there still remains a very strong desire in sort of in international student within the international student population to study in the US. So, I think that these are issues that we're grappling with as a society as a whole. And so I think that we're going to continue to kind of advocate and we do remain optimistic that numbers will will rise after the pandemic is over. And I think that, it remains with us as a society as a whole and with our new administration to tackle some of these other issues. I don't know, Julie, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that I think US colleges and universities are also very keenly aware of this. And, this is something that we touch upon in our fall snapshot survey as well. And, we hear from many colleges and universities that they really value, both the health, given COVID, but also the safety of their students. And that's for their US students as well as their international students. And they've often described really the extensive resources that they allocate towards safety and security, and also working with local communities. And really, I would also say working to be open and transparent and discuss some of these issues. And that includes discussing them with prospective students, but their parents, sometimes having alumni reach out and have these discussions with prospective students. And really putting out that welcoming message very broadly.
All right, so here's Michael's question. Michael wants to know, do we have data on how many international students who achieve high levels of education remain to work in the US? Also, is there a trend? And he's specifically interested in this number for China.
So that is not something that we collect through Open Doors. So we don't have any sort of statistics about how many people remain either after graduation or after they complete their optional practical training experiences.
Right, so let's go to Will's question. From what I heard, you mentioned the most significant decrease in total student numbers came from community colleges within Washington state. Do you see this playing out in other parts of the country as well?
We do. So community colleges had one of the largest percent declines this past year at about 8%. We also saw declines in master's institutions, which tend to be your regional state level institutions. But that's certainly something that we see both in Washington state, but also nationally.
Also, there's another part to Will's question is, if community colleges students are being most affected, do you have any insight as to why that is beyond pure speculation? Why are community colleges more affected than others?
Oh gosh, I don't want to certainly speculate or kind of speak for all community colleges. I think community colleges offer such a great opportunity for access to not only great programs here in the United States, but also to continue further study and in a really cost-effective way. And I think it can be sometimes a challenge to tell that story to other parts of the world that may not be as familiar with community college systems. But I think that's something that IIE has been very supportive of. The U.S. Department of State has also been very supportive of the development of 2+2 programs and really showcasing the benefits of community colleges throughout the world. So that's another area that I know Education USA, which is a State Department program, has been very focused on.
Right, and I'm wondering if David would like to come on and share his comment here. A very interesting comment, and this could be a big trend here, where folks choosing not to go too far away and taking a lot of online classes, and the study abroad become. David, do you want to come and talk about it?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm in the field and very interested in how emerging tech is disrupting the international education field as a whole. And I see a ton of resistance to this in higher ed in the U.S. as well as other parts of the world. A sense of really an unwillingness to accept the fact that things are changing in a fundamental way historically. I mean, I'm a history buff, and I don't think there's a moment like this in the entire history of the human race where the entire world has been changed around how people learn at the same time everywhere, and it's persistent. So I'm just wondering, IIE has such a fabulous expertise in data analytics. I asked the question here about student mobility and fundamental changes that are occurring. You don't necessarily need to get into how many higher ed institutions are going to be closing as a result of this, but there are a lot of comments on that out there. But I just like your sort of macro overview of what this all means, particularly with the pandemic and tech changing everything.
I guess I can start us out, and Julie may have some more specifics on the data. I mean, I think we're certainly still learning what this new kind of learning means, right? And I think like from our perspective in terms of our programming, I think that what we will see in the future when things start to open up and when people feel more comfortable, I think we'll see a couple of different things. One, you point out more regionalized sort of study abroad. I think that's definitely something that we're seeing with our colleagues in other parts of the world. Our colleague in Bangkok, he sees students traveling more in the region. They're able to go and study in different parts of the region. I think that will be a trend until globally we kind of come out of the pandemic. I think that there's great demand for online learning opportunities. We do a lot of work with supporting refugees in higher ed and displaced students in higher ed. And we actually just announced an opportunity to get an edX MicroMasters. So it's a short MicroMasters program. And we had like 1,300 applications within a 3-week period of students who were just really interested in the opportunity. I think we've seen, so I do think there is demand for more online opportunities. I think, I also think that we've seen greater numbers of scholarship applications than we've ever seen, which speaks to both increased financial need and also for scholarships where students are able, the scholarship is about coming to the US. I think it also speaks to the continued interest in coming to the US and coming to the US in person. So I think there will continue to be a demand globally for in-person educational opportunities, and specifically, specifically focused on coming to the US. So those are just a few of my thoughts. Julie might have probably some comments to add as well.
No, I think it's a great question, and just as we think towards the future, what does this all mean? I do agree with Mary that I think I've seen some evidence that applications are, are up for this next year for fall of 2021. So I think that the interest does continue and that there will be a demand for students to be mobile and come to the United States, and there continues to be an interest in the United States. That being said, I think colleges and universities have had to pivot to an online learning space, and they've learned a lot over the past year and what that means and how to deliver that type of educational experience. And, with those learnings, I don't think it's going to completely go away, after this is all over. So I will be quite interested to see what happens in the next couple of years, and if it does just revert back to the way it was, or if this is really a new normal. And I think that there's evidence that online learning isn't going to go away, and people are learning how to do it better now. There are still challenges, particularly within the international education space, because you may have a class at 9 a.m. here, but what is that time zone in Abu Dhabi, and how do you help students who may not be physically located in the same time zone and still provide all of those student support services and really making sure that they're getting a quality education. But I think that colleges and universities have done a tremendous job over the past year and are really focused on those issues and trying to make sure that students can have successful, meaningful, enriching experiences where they are connecting in this virtual format.
I just had one more thing to add. I think, as an organization too, IAE, I think there's sort of a silver lining to everything. And I think one of the things that we will keep doing is there are so many pluses to incorporating virtual components as part of an in-person exchange, right? So I think what will continue happening in the future is that, we'll continue to utilize, virtual avenues to kind of get folks together before they come on program. We were doing that before, but we're getting even better at it now. And I think more than anything, that will also accelerate, the kind of impact that folks will have once they do come on program, whatever that type of program is.
All right, let's move on to a few other questions. I know both of our panelists have to hop on to another meeting in 10 minutes. So let's cover a few more questions. Marcia is talking about community colleges not having dorms. And I know that some of the community colleges here especially in Washington State, they're building one. Shoreline I think has just built one. Green River already has it, and they're expanding. Edmond, I think, is building. So do you see the impact beyond this, just the economic impact beyond that? Do you see that international students also impact how higher education institutions employ their capital? Will we see a new trend, or have you seen a new trend in the past?
I think it's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But I certainly think that if there's an incentive to build more housing because more students will come and need housing, I don't see why that trend wouldn't kind of continue.
And that trend also see there, they're often going back to the previous question that I referred, that very often we see that local population everywhere. In Australia, we have seen some in Canada, in the US. They're often, there's conflicted ideas about whether international students are, is it a good idea to have international students or not? Only when you go into this very nuanced details of what impact they have, you understand this. But for a normal person on the street, the perception is that these are international folks. They are coming in and they disrupt how our capital is used for our purposes. Have you seen anything that that has stood out in your data where local populations thought that it was not a good idea to have international students because how their resources are being reallocated or redesigned?
Julie, I don't know if you've seen anything in the data specifically.
I wouldn't say that we've seen anything in the data specifically about this alignment of resources, just because our most of the data that we collect is very much focused on looking at the trends in mobility and who's coming and on the flip side, who's studying abroad. So I don't have any specific kind of insights around that area.
And I would just say that I think one of the things that we try to do in general is really, as much as possible, share those impact stories, those positive stories. The data and the numbers are one piece, and individual stories are, another really compelling piece of why international students are important to our society. And I think of the Humphrey Fellows, which is part of the Fulbright program, and they're mid-career professionals who come to the US and they're placed in cohorts at several universities around the US. And, they'll always spend time going into grade schools to talk about where they come from. And a lot of international students do that as well. A lot of universities have programs like that. I think these are the kinds of things that are really important to dispelling those myths, really, because that they're not based in any kind of truth. And so I think the volunteering opportunities, different things like that, I think are go a long way in terms of like telling the story. And I think that international students tell the story much better than any of us can do through their own experiences.
Right. Thank you. We have a very interesting question. Hans, would you like to come on video and ask your question about the industrial espionage concerns impacted higher ed recruits?
I'm sorry, did you ask me to?
Yes, you wanna ask your question?
And the question is, given the emphasis that we've been seeing lately on espionage, whether it be starting at the Confucius Institutes or whether just people moving into research facilities, have you seen any impact on universities in the United States asking different types of questions or doing a different type of vetting as they either recruit or welcome foreign students?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know, Julie, do you know? And if
Yeah, I haven't heard of any sort of changes in terms of the application processes for international students from U.S. higher education institutions specifically. It's not an area that we ask about, but I will say there, we continue to see strong interest in international students from every part of the world. And we did see an increase in the number of international students, for example, from China, even this past year, despite a decline. So, I think that the interest to come and study in the United States continues to be strong, and US institutions very much are committed to welcoming international students.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have the last 2 minutes left, so I'll just open the floor. And I know both of our panelists, you folks have to leave in 2 minutes. I just wanted to open the floor and have any other question. Please feel free to ask. And we'll hang out. We'll stay here. I know even after the panelists have left, we would love to be here and talk a little bit about the World Affairs Council programs and what's coming up, and just have a informal chit chat with what we do here and what's coming up next. But any specific question on higher ed, our panelists are still with us for another maybe couple of minutes.
I have a question.
Sure, David, go ahead.
So I think Mary and Julie, have you been involved with NAFSA over the years?
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I think probably quite a few of us here have been. I'm just interested in your thoughts on how new ecosystems are emerging in international education, where the traditional associations, I'm in Seattle Rotary, and Rotary is really working to try to reinvent itself, with the online world and stuff, and it's doing okay in Seattle. But I think that everybody's under a lot of pressure. How are you observing that happening within the profession, as far as how we're reinventing ourselves and moving forward to embrace the technology as well?
That's a great question. I think certainly while in-person exchange, there are things that really can't be replicated on Zoom. I do think that IIE has really always been about the exchange of not only people, but ideas, right? And so, I think we're more than ever thinking really broadly about our mission and about how we can really support the exchange of ideas in a time when travel is really limited, and sort of like, what is our role in supporting and connecting people across cultures, across disciplines, across racial, ethnic, national lines. And so, I think it is a time, I think, for so many different professions and fields to really kind of re-examine what we're doing, how we're doing things. And, I don't think we're still figuring it out.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't know if Hans is still there, but I'm curious about the question that Hans is asking regarding national security and the impact. Anecdotally I know that the U.S. government is requiring Chinese who apply for graduate programs to list whether or not they have any affiliation with the People's Liberation Army or other forces. Also, I know that, and there's quite a bit of scrutiny there, but also I know that I believe there was some regulation about restricting travel by Communist Party members, of which there's 90 million. I have to believe that may have some impact on students coming from China. And I asked the question about how many students are staying because I've heard, there's a concern about people getting PhDs in STEM programs and returning to their country versus staying in this country and working and benefiting the country. So there's a lot of controversy about that, but I wonder if data will capture whether this is a valid concern or not.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Julie, you can speak to kind of how we collect our data, but certainly I think that we're all in a bit of a wait and see mode because it's not right just about what higher ed institution, like whether higher ed institutions are doing additional vetting. It's, are you able to get a visa to kind of come to the US?
Right.
And I think that we do know that has been more challenging of late. Whether it will continue to be more challenging, I think is a question. So I don't know, Julie, Open Doors doesn't, I mean, you really looking at once students actually get here, not how many students are trying to get here.
Right. We are very focused on the enrollment of international students. Yeah. I don't know if there are any college or university representatives on the line who may be able to speak to this as well, and kind of anything that you're seeing anecdotally at your institutions or changes that you've implemented.
I can address that. I work with a bunch of institutions, and right now they're seeing a big influx of interest for fall. So applications are up. The question will be whether they show up. So, there's a sense right now of a bit of a breaking of the dam. International students have been waiting a year. They're really excited about trying to go abroad, but, will they actually make it abroad when it comes to August and September? So, but yeah, I think right now people are feeling pretty good in different parts of the U.S. that I work with. So it's a sort of springtime of international education a little bit. I had a trick question for you though. Any data on Iranian students coming? I was born in Tehran, so I'm really always curious about how we're doing with Iranian students coming into the country. And, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the actual statistics so I can get it right for you. So Iran does continue to be within the top 25 places of origin. As of 2019-20, there were just over 11,000 international students from Iran. I will say it's one of the fascinating trend lines just to look at over time, because we do have the data going back to 1950s. So if you ever go on our website and kind of look at that trend line in terms of Iranian students, it's a really interesting one.
Surprisingly big number, actually.
They are ranked 13th out of all the over 220 countries that we have data on.
Yep.
And we do have, so as Julie mentioned, we work with the U.S. Department of State to support regional academic advisors in all over the world. And we do have a REAC who is devoted specifically to Iran and to supporting Iranian students in their desire to study in the U.S.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Mary, do you have any sense whether or not there will be exchange programs happening this summer, such as Nestle or other will they go abroad?
Yeah, that's that's a big question. We have a study abroad program focused on U.S. students studying in Asia, and what we're seeing is that some of those programs are slated to happen. We don't know how many of them though. So I think this is a case where some of the some regions, I think things will start happening. We have some fellows on the Carnegie African Diaspora Program that I had mentioned, who actually, a colleague of mine was telling me he heard from a couple of them who are in the US today, who said, we got our COVID vaccines, we are ready to go, and the host institutions that they're working with are kind of ready to receive them. So, I think things will start slowly and in pockets, and hopefully will continue in a good trajectory.
Great.
Yeah.
And I guess one kind of piece I'll add just in terms of a rebound from the Open Doors perspective is that, that is one of the benefits of having, like I said, this history over time. And what we have seen in the data is after health crises or natural disasters or even, economic downturn, is that, after each of these, there have been rebounds. So one of the things that I've enjoyed looking at, for example, is just kind of what has happened after several events like this. Now, COVID is an entirely unprecedented, but I know I was looking, for example, at study abroad to West Africa during Ebola, and we saw a huge downturn in study abroad to the region, just completely plummeted. But within about 2 to 3 years, it had rebounded back up to the same levels as it was prior to the health crises. So I think that there is a lot of interest and demand on the student side to, I know we talked about international students, but also on the study abroad side for students and programs to start back up as soon as it's safe to travel again.
By the way, BASA and CASA in Beijing? BASA, it's the agent network. So they had a webinar last week. They said there's 2.3 million Chinese that indicate they want to go abroad right now.
Yeah. I mean, we are optimistic. I think if there's anything that we'd want to leave you all with from like sort of IAE's perspective is that we are very optimistic. And I think that we are also really focused on ensuring that optimism is also cognizant of being able to support the populations that also have been most impacted by COVID. So I think that, as things start again, I think we want to make sure that, we are continuing to work with kind of underserved populations, to work with those populations that have been most impacted by this pandemic. So. Unfortunately, Julie and I do have to hop off. I'm on kid duty in just a little bit. But I think both of us are like, I mean, Julie will speak for herself and thank you all. But I think I can speak for both of us in saying that we are happy to be in touch with any of you individually, and Syed can share our contact information, and just really appreciate the opportunity and all of the discussion.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Julie. I know
You.
you stayed longer than over 10 minutes over, but yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll come back to you and share some more information, and would love to have you come back and have another discussion. But for others, we'll just hang out here.
Thank you all.
And I'm going to pause the recording.